So before we dive into different types of biological traits, let's take some time to go over some common genetic definitions so we avoid confusion. Some terms that you might hear as we're going through these modules is diploid. Diploid actually means having two copies of each chromosome. If you're thinking, what's an example of a diploid organism? Just think of yourself. Humans are a prime example of diploid organisms. That is, we have two copies of each chromosome. We get one of these chromosomes from mom and one from dad. You might also hear the term allele be thrown around quite often. An allele is simply an alternative form of a gene, or in other words, a specific version of a gene. This term can also be used to describe a specific version of a nucleotide, the DNA bases that make up the genome. I think our figure over to the right will help clarify these two terms for us. Here we have inheritance at chromosome 1. At the top of our figure we have our parents, each with two sets of chromosomes. We have our dad on the left and our mom on the right. Now our dad has two different versions of chromosome 1. One is white, so let's have that be the white allele, and one is red. Let's have it be the red allele. And your mom has two different alleles of chromosome 1, being the blue and the green allele. Now your mom and dad each pass one of these chromosomes along to you. So your dad passes the white chromosome and your mom passes the green chromosome to you, with you having two copies of chromosome 1, one being the white allele and one being the green allele. And finally, to round out our definitions, the genotype is often referred to indicate the set of alleles or versions of genes that an individual has for a specific trait. Now that we have a good idea of the genetic lingo that's commonly used, let's talk about different types of traits. The first type of trait we're going to talk about today are called monogenic traits. These are called monogenic because they involve only one gene in expressing the phenotype. I think a great example of a monogenic trait is cystic fibrosis. And if you're unfamiliar with cystic fibrosis, this is a disorder that is caused by changes in only one specific gene. These genetic changes have severe impacts on the lungs and digestive system, where the body produces a thick and sticky mucus that can clog the lungs and obstruct portions of the digestive tract. You can see here that the CFTR gene on one of our chromosomes is the only gene that impacts whether we develop cystic fibrosis. The other type of traits that we're going to cover today are known as polygenic traits. These are traits that are controlled by more than one gene. A great example of this would be the skin color phenotype. Whereas before, in our cystic fibrosis example, we had one gene controlling whether or not we developed a disease like cystic fibrosis, now we have a number of genes, each contributing in a smaller way to the overall expression of the skin color phenotype. This is why we see such variation in skin pigmentation in the population. You can see here an easy side-by-side comparison between types of traits and phenotypes. We usually study these monogenic traits in our genetics and biology classes, but it's important to remember that by and large, monogenic traits seen here on the left side are actually quite rare, and much more common are these polygenic traits that are controlled by a number of genes across the genome. Let's return back to our equation from earlier. Remember that each phenotype is a combination of our genes, or more precisely, the alleles or versions of those genes, and our environment and lifestyle choices. Sometimes, in the case of monogenic traits like cystic fibrosis, it is 100% genetic. That is, one gene is controlling the expression of that phenotype, and there's no environmental input. But as we said, most of the time, it's actually not that simple. For any given trait, there are a number of genes that collectively make up your genotype, or the particular versions of genes that you have for a given trait. And your environment and lifestyle that has a number of individual factors as well that together impact the final expression of the phenotype. For example, height is about 80% genetic, but you may be surprised to know that about 20% of the expression of your height is actually due to your environment while growing up. Additionally, most of these traits we are still learning about. Take asthma as an example. You may even have asthma yourself, or even know someone in your family or friends that may have it. It's extremely common. This trait is also a combination of the genes you inherit and your environment. Scientists are working to understand both the genetic and environmental pieces of this equation. Currently, our estimates are that 35 to 70% of the asthma phenotype are caused by a number of genes, each having a fairly small effect, and about 30 to 65% are due to environmental factors having an effect on the phenotype. By studying both the genes and the environment that impact this phenotype, we will hopefully develop better medicines and treatment for people with asthma. In practice, you can see that our simple equation that we started with can get very complex very quickly, with genetic and environmental factors each playing a role in the expression of any given phenotype. We even have environmental factors that can influence how we express specific genes in our cells that all work together to produce the asthma phenotype. I hope now that we've gotten an appreciation for how complex this seemingly simple equation can get depending on the phenotype under study. For most traits and phenotypes, we have a number of genes that contribute and a number of environmental factors that play a role in the expression of any given phenotype. As you can imagine, this is a tremendous amount of data and is still a large portion of bioinformatics research today. In order to store and analyze all of this information and data, there are many efforts to study how genetic changes actually impact human health and phenotypes. If you'd like to learn more about these research efforts and some of the commonly used databases designed to store this type of information, visit the links in the notes section of this module.